When I think about the crisis in Afghanistan, and I read the reports, and I see footage of innocent civilians being caught in the middle of this war, my heart breaks. I don't know how anybody can see these images and not get moved in some way or affected in some way. Now, maybe you haven't been following along with what's been going on, because in Australia, the mainstream media doesn't really report this a lot. The news we're concerned with is often COVID case numbers and vaccines and when's lockdown going to finish, those kind of things. But the reality is, over there, it is a very desperate situation. You have innocent people, families, children who are really, really suffering. Now, living in these violent conditions is not something that's new to a lot of people in that country. According to reports, nearly 6 million Afghans have been driven from their homes and their country because of war, violence and persecution. And out of that number, 3 million are still in the country, but they're displaced and looking for refuge. More recently, thousands of families have been driven out by the Taliban, and now they're homeless. So they've got persecution, violence, oppression, all kinds of injustices that these people are experiencing. And we can't even imagine what they're going through. And so I look at myself as a comfortable first world Christian. And to be honest, that's what I am. That's what we are. We're living in a very comfortable society. Yes, the lockdown in Melbourne, the most locked down city in the world, it has been difficult on a lot of people, no doubt about that. But compared to what these guys are experiencing in Afghanistan, we're very comfortable. And as a comfortable first world Christian, I ask myself, what can I do? Is there anything I can do? Is there anything any of us can do? Or are we powerless to do anything at all? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people say, well, that's happening over there, I can't help. Or that's up to the government, or that's up to the armed forces to look after that, I can't do anything to help. But is that true? The way I see it is that if we have means to help people in that position, then I believe we should. If we don't have the means, we can't. But if we do have the means, we can, and I believe we should. Because Proverbs 3:27 says, do not withhold good from those who deserve it when it's in your power to help them. So if we have the means to help people who are in desperate need, and we have that power to help, especially those who are suffering and facing all kinds of injustice, then I believe that we should help. But how? How can we help? Well, shortly, Grace is going to outline a few things that we can do to help. One of those things is for us as a country to increase the intake of refugees. There have been neighbouring countries to Afghanistan that have welcomed refugees. There are others who say that, hey, we can't take any more. There are countries that say they can take Afghan refugees, but only temporarily. Then there are places like Canada, UK, Germany, and France who say that they're going to, or have agreed to, increase the intake of refugees, but there still is a limit, leaving thousands of families still out in the cold. And this is where I believe that us in this country need to enter into the discussion and do more. Because like I said, many innocent people are suffering, and if we've got the means to do something, I believe that we should do it. Okay, but before Grace comes and talks about what all this looks like, I just want to look at this from a biblical perspective, not a political standpoint, but a biblical standpoint with regards to refugees and welcoming people into our country, especially people who are fleeing from war and all kinds of oppression. Now, the Bible doesn't use the word refugee or immigrant or asylum seeker and those words we normally use, but it does use the word foreigner, which in its context can be viewed in much the same way. According to the Bible, foreigners or outsiders are to be valued and treated with respect and with dignity. Not dismissed, not disassociated with, but welcomed. For example, in the Old Testament, there were instructions given to Israel saying that foreigners were to be included into their Jewish community. There were to be provisions for them to be treated equally under the law and to be included in festivals and celebrations within the community. Right? So here are just a few examples of how foreigners were in a way assimilated into that community. We see in Numbers 35 that the cities of refuge were available to Israelites and foreigners. In Deuteronomy 16 and 26, foreigners were to be included in festivals and celebrations mandated in the law. Also, some of the tithe collected by the priests was to be used not only to feed them and their families, but also to help provide food for foreigners, widows, and orphans. Farmers were instructed to leave the gleanings of their fields for the poor and the foreigner. And it also says in Leviticus to treat the stranger or foreigner as they would the poor among the Israelites. So these were instructions given to Israel. Now, do you notice those last 2 points are talking about displaced people, okay, and people without food? Well, in Afghanistan at the moment, there are thousands of displaced people, and many of them don't have food. Many of them don't have limited medical resources. They're living in tents. They're forced out of their region, like I said, either due to the war around them or forced out by the Taliban. And they don't have a home now. They don't have a job. They're being oppressed. They're being persecuted. And now, in addition to this, you have Islamic State, which is a more violent and extreme terrorist group using their power to take ground. And now you have all these innocent civilians caught in the middle of this, and they are suffering and they need help. And so I think it's time for us in this country, and you and I included, to help those who are suffering. If God gave instructions to Israel welcoming foreigners and helping the poor and the marginalized and the widows and the orphans, and that same sentiment is also expressed in the New Testament, then I believe it needs to be our responsibility to do something. That's the way I see it from a biblical perspective. As I said, not from a political standpoint, but simply from what the Bible says about this issue. Anyway, enough of me right now. I'm going to hand it over to Grace, and she's going to talk to you more about this.